Hey guys, quick one here for you. Been thinking about the cyclical carbogenic diet, right? Talking about sugar fasting. People have been saying intermittent sugar fasting. Sorry, I just got out of the sauna. The nature of this is going to find its way into this cyclical process. You're going to find that this works for a certain amount of time, and then your body will start sending you signals. And so when people talk about plateauing, I think it's important that we differentiate between people who are, let's say, trying to sugar fast and putting their pedal to the metal forever and then hitting a plateau versus people plateauing because, maybe they're cheating on the diet too much. And what we're going to find is if you break up the diet, right? And that what that really means is you purposefully add the cyclical nature to it. It's not breaking it up. You're actually continuing the diet, but you are breaking up sugar fasting periods, part of a greater holistic diet perspective. And what that will also do is you will find that it will prevent any desire for cheating. And what we kind of really want to do is we want to take what might be thought of as a cheat and work it into the diet, right? If you've been familiar with diets for some time, you've probably heard of all the cyclical ketogenic diets. This is basically a diet structure where you eat keto and then, once a week or perhaps for 2 days every week, you then carb refeed. And everyone who was doing these ketogenic diets already knew that your metabolism would slow down without carbs. So the way that this was usually employed was, okay, we're going to add a bunch of starch usually. People talked about some sugar, but they usually were focused on starch, and this will be interesting. And what they said was have starch and protein, but keep fat as minimal as possible because you don't want to gain fat from the refeed. You want to minimize any fat gain from the refeed. So imagine you are having a giant serving of white rice with a very lean protein. And so sushi was very, very popular for refeeds on cyclical ketogenic diets. And I think we can take a lot of that and sort of flip it on its head in some ways, right? Because as opposed to a ketogenic diet where we're refeeding with carbs, the metabolism doesn't respond the same way for a carb diet to then refeed with fat. The body wants fat because if you continue to eat low fat, you will become likely fat deficient. But what's really happening here is it's not that fat is stimulating the metabolism. You are just getting more of those nutrients in. You don't want to be too far without essential, the fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. There's a lot of, I would say the whole idea about essential fatty acids, I'm not really going to talk about that, but I don't think it's as clear cut as a lot of people say it is. But you're talking about the fat soluble vitamins and the B vitamins, which are going to be most common in protein rich foods. Those are the nutrients that you're going to be deficient in. But what are we getting for a metabolic rebound? What are we getting for the halting of any sort of metabolic slowdown and actually a revamping of the metabolism? It seems like, from my experience, it's going to be starch again. I have noticed this. I've been experimenting with high sugar diets for quite a while now. I would say I really started driving sugar up really high in 2019, but I wasn't really avoiding starch so much. But from all of these different versions that I've tried, what I found is I can go pretty high sugar for an extended period of time, a few days in a row, close to a week in that period. And when I was eating protein regularly with the sugar, the main craving would be starch. I wouldn't really be craving protein, but of course I was eating it all the time. Now on these diet versions where I am not eating protein either, I am also finding that I really do not crave that much protein. It's very minimal. My main craving from sugar fasting is starch again. And I think that plays a huge role in what is getting the metabolism going again. I think protein is a part of it. I think it's pretty small. And what I have noticed is the starches that I usually go for are white rice because I just feel like I can eat so much of it. And something about it, my body really seems to crave and want. But there is like, I think white rice is like 8 to 10% protein. So there still is a little bit of protein there, but the starch is doing something. And I wonder how much of it is, a lot of the reason why we're talking about sugar and fructose is because fructose goes to the liver. And that's where the FGF21 thing comes in, right? The liver sees an overabundance of calories because fructose goes straight to the liver, turns on FGF21 as a natural mechanism to increase the metabolic rate because it thinks that it's getting so much food. It also protects the liver from fatty liver disease. But the glucose that you consume in starch, the glucose is going to be digested and it's going to require an insulin spike, and then it's going to go to the muscles. And I think the insulin is a part of it, and I think the glycogen in the muscle is a part of it. I have heard from some people, and again, I don't have any specific science or studies, but I've heard it often said that the body doesn't lose fat when the muscles are filled with glycogen. When the glycogen stores are fully topped up, the body doesn't want to lose fat. What might be happening, and I'm not saying anything about that whatsoever, but it seems like there's something about the muscle glycogen having some effect on the metabolism here. And what I think is happening is for people who are doing an abundance of sugar, it's possible that the muscles aren't actually filled with glycogen fully. And so what is happening is almost the body gets this surge of muscle glycogen, and perhaps similar to the liver getting this signal, which we know to be FGF21, though potentially there are other factors at play, which stimulates the metabolism. I wonder if there's something else that's happening that the body does when it senses that the muscle glycogen is full. People would often, in the bodybuilding world, they would say that you would spill over on a refeed, which means you basically go over your full glycogen stores, at which point all of the extra carbohydrate gets stored as fat. I wonder if getting, maybe not even spilling over, but getting closer to that full muscle glycogen state, that is signaling something in the body in a different way that is also stimulating the metabolism to revamp itself and kickstart a bunch more fat loss. It seems to be this breaking up of the certain process that's happened with the sugar fasting. And we really don't need to call this anything else besides a starch refeed. That's where I really feel like that is going to be where the biggest bang for the buck is in regards to how do you make this diet cyclical. The high carb vegans like Durian Rider, they're all big fans of starch kind of in perpetuity, as in the sense that the diet kind of looks like, because they kind of come from this raw till four concept. You would basically be sugar fasting every day, and then you have a starch refeed at dinner. And I think if you were to imagine people starting with that diet, I think it would just take a lot longer to lose the fat as the body is trying to improve its insulin sensitivity. And so what I think we're seeing, though, is whether a ketogenic diet, whether a raw till four Durian Rider diet, whatever is now emerging with this Ray Peat inspired, also like meathead bodybuilding bro kind of convergence of this sugar fasting with purposeful breaking with protein and starch. I think everyone in a way is kind of doing the same thing in various ways. There's something about giving the body a deprivation of protein, which is important for FGF21. And again, FGF21, regardless of whether or not you are consuming the liver directed nutrients, being fructose and MCT oil, even if you're doing a regular ketogenic diet that has 80% or more of your calories from fat, there's something about the body seeing an abundance of calories with a lack of protein that turns on FGF21. And oddly enough, it's the starch that is breaking this up somehow. And like I said, I think there might be some of the protein at play, even in the starch itself. And of course, like, again, I'm not a vegan, and I think it's really important to include, meat, seafood, dairy occasionally. Of course, I think that's part of a healthy diet regardless. But in this fat loss phase, I still want people to include it on a weekly basis. Maybe the extremely overweight people don't need to as much, but like one oyster and one little piece of liver, or like one little piece of cheese a week, is not going to really impede any significant fat loss, but is going to help a lot with the nutrients that you aren't getting from a pure sugar fasting diet. So I'm hoping that some of the people who are way more science literate than I am, and I can maybe try to Google whatever it is that I can as well too, but some of these people have really good minds for the science, anabology, Joe Brindley, a lot of people in the repeat sphere as well too. I think we're going to find something with the starch specifically, because I've said this many times. I don't really have really strong protein cravings on the sugar fasting diet. I'm eating the sugar and I'm feeling good, and then I get this really strong starch craving. And I think there's some overlap with salt as well too, because I think our bodies associate starch with salt, and starch is a great vehicle for salt. But I've noticed that the thing that I really crave the most would be things like white rice and pasta. And I don't really need like oil and meat on my pasta for it to be craving and satiating. All I need is the pasta, and I can put some lemon juice and some herbs on it. And I find, I've said this before too, some seafood. And so oddly enough, I'd say maybe my three go-tos on my cravings for types of cuisine are Asian food, especially sushi. So you're talking white rice heavy with some seafood. And then Mexican food. So I like corn chips. And again, they don't need fat. I can bake my own chips. There are brands of chips that don't have fat. And that's how I know that the fat isn't what I'm craving. But corn chips, salsa, seafood, maybe a little bit of protein, regardless of what it is. And then Italian food, again, pasta with just lemon juice and shrimp. I'm using my own experience to drive what I think is happening here. I'm trying to listen to what my body is telling me, see how I'm feeling, see what I'm craving, and try to share that with you guys to see if it helps at all. And I think there's got to be something there in the nutrients available in the seafood, in some of the lean proteins, and then the starch is a really big part of what I think is happening metabolically here. And for me, a lot of people talk about when they start the sugar diet, they have just an abundance of energy. And what you'll notice is that if you take sugar fast for a longer period, you will notice the energy come down a little bit. And what I've noticed that all I have to do to break that up is if I have a giant dinner of just pure white rice, and maybe I'll put some soy sauce on it, or maybe I'll just add nothing but salt. Maybe I'll add some salsa. All I need is like one giant dinner of that, and I feel like it just starts over again. So I think there's a huge part of that. I think there's also something about the protein. If I were to say, because again, like the thing I really want out of this for myself, and what I hope people can find, is what is sustainable and what is easy to follow, what makes you feel good. And so I have found myself just really drawn to 2 to 3 days of sugar fasting at a time. And if I had no social events and no other extenuating circumstances that would affect what I eat, I would be very content for quite some time doing a 3-day sugar fast, and then a starch refeed, and then a 3-day sugar fast and a protein and starch refeed. So I really don't feel like I need a protein meal more than once a week. I feel like I want a starch meal about twice a week. And this is where I'm settling into. And this is going to change as time goes on. You will notice like each individual person will have a different set of cravings and feelings. And I'm only sharing my own. But I think that there is, if everyone can kind of really do their best to try to pay attention to what their body is doing, what their body is telling them, when they have energy, when they sleep. That's why I've talked about taking your temperature and having a, you know, you don't even have to, I wear a Fitbit. I like to have the data on my sleep because I feel like it just helps. Sleep is something I've struggled with my whole life. But I don't need this to tell me I got good sleep, but it helps for me to look back at what I've been trying and when it is tracked with my good sleep as well. So pay attention to your body temperature. That's a really good sign for what your metabolism is doing. I know I've been doing really well lately because I just feel nice and warm. And when I take my temperature, it is, you know, high. It's in the 98s when I'm waking. It's getting into the 99s after eating. That's a good sign. I'm falling asleep at a reasonable time. I can fall asleep by 9, 10, or 11 every night. And for anyone who has listened to me talk about my sleep, you know, for me, falling asleep before midnight was just a win for so much of my life. Pay attention to your energy levels, you know, pay attention to your performance in the gym. I think it's important to prioritize whether or not your goal is fat loss versus, you know, you want to make the most gains in the gym. You can segment everything. Again, I think we're going to settle into a cyclical sugar diet, a cyclical carbogenic diet, that your body is primarily running on carbohydrates. And again, there might be people who they can kind of do the durian rider thing where they eat starch and sugar every day, and then the refeed is only going to be the addition of protein. And you know, I'm not talking about fat so much because I think it's just inevitable you'll get fat in your diet. You'll, like, fat will come in. If you ever kind of just let loose and have pizza or ice cream, which I think people should be able to have no problem, you'll be getting plenty of fat in those foods. I'm a big fan of milk. I've talked about my occasional milk day. You know, I think the fat will be the types of fat will need to come in a lot less than the protein and starch will to make you feel good for a long time. So, you know, play with all these things. Think about this cyclical concept, because no diet, you're not going to eat the same way every day forever. You know, no one does this. This isn't normal. This isn't natural. No one feels good on this. People have cravings. So just don't, you know, get it out of your head that you just sugar fast forever. Think about which foods and when you bring them in and make them purposeful. Because if you don't make a point to do that, you will first start to suffer severe nutrient deficiencies. And secondly, you will have crazy binges, which might undo all the progress you've made. So something to keep in mind. Keep experimenting, keep asking your questions. I'll try to do some more, some Q&As from the past questions you guys have put on my older videos, and maybe I'll do some lives coming up. I've been traveling a lot lately. Hope everybody is doing well, crushing the sugars, losing weight, feeling good, have energy, sleep well. See you guys later.